Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Leon, thanks for having me again. I think Leon knows this is one of my favorite events of the year, so it's really very proud and very pleased to be here. So I'm going to give you just a 30-second overview of my firm because I think it'll lend some context to why some might say I have the audacity to stand up here and talk about mobile payments on a global scale. A pretty large subject. So I'm with a 70-person consulting firm called Hyperion. So we're pretty diminutive and pretty modest in size. That said, we've had the pleasure and privilege. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? I've had the pleasure and privilege as a firm. We've had the pleasure and privilege to work on some really interesting projects. And so if you think across the breadth of the firm, we have 4 primary practice areas. The first one is in the card specification business. That's sort of where our origins come from. And so we're pleased to say that most of you, or certainly some of you, are walking around with cards in your pocket that we probably had a role in bringing to market, particularly from a security and a specification standpoint. We do a fair bit of work in transit. I think the most prominent project we've had the luxury of working on is TfL in London. So for any of you that have taken TfL in recent years, you've seen they move to the open payment platform. We had an instrumental role in bringing that to bear, first with Oyster and now with any contactless cards. We have a fairly prominent mobile money practice. I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we've done in Africa, but we've done work in Kenya, we've done work in Uganda, we've done work in Malawi, and more recently in Nigeria. So that's a pretty interesting part of our business. And then lastly, we've done a lot of work in and around the area of identity with a particular emphasis and a particular interest around blockchain and how that can be leveraged in the identity space. So I share all that with you because the one thing, while those businesses are separate and distinct, and the one thing they share in common is payments, the other thing they share in common, and it's becoming increasingly more important, is that they're all moving or migrating in some form or fashion to the mobile channel. And because we're doing work right now in North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and Europe, we're starting to see some consistencies. We're starting to see some repeatability in the requirements and sort of this real thrust to move to the mobile channel, because the mobile channel, for a lot of the reasons Sasha pointed out, creates better security, creates less friction, creates a much better user experience. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through the presentation. So with that, I'll just jump into some facts and figures. Probably not something that you're not accustomed to or haven't heard before, but with a global population of over 7 billion people, you have about 6.5 billion mobile subscriptions spread amongst about 4.5 billion mobile subscribers. And so what's interesting about this slide, and I didn't pay close enough attention to the graphics when I developed it, which was actually a while ago, the picture of the smartphones is somewhat deceiving. As we know, you walk around the streets of New York or anywhere in the developed world, it could be London, it could be just about anywhere. You're hard-pressed to find somebody that doesn't have a Samsung, an iPhone, an HTC, some variant of a smartphone. But there's still a substantial part of the world population that still requires some feature phones. And feature phones have played an important role in the mobile payment arena. I mean, that's what launched M-Pesa in Kenya. Was basically an SMS messaging platform and able to move money to one another. And I think it's important we talk about that for a minute on subsequent slides. However, this is really small. You see that mobile penetration globally is almost ubiquitous. And I think the thing that's becoming more increasingly important is connectivity. In developing worlds, until probably maybe the last few years, once you moved out of the main cities off the trunk roads, connectivity became more and more of a challenge. You're now starting to see more widespread ubiquity of something as simple as just connecting to the internet. So with that, I'll move into this. Again, a little bit more about the adoption of mobile payments. There were just under $500 billion in transactions last year, spread across 350 million mobile payment users. Far and away, our research indicates that the bulk of that comes in the form of just peer-to-peer money transfers. And it's the most obvious and it's the most obvious use case. And when you think about the M-Pesa example, which I know we're going to talk about a lot today, we got really lucky. About 8 years ago, Nick Hughes from Vodafone called up my firm and had a really interesting idea. And so we were privileged enough to get in at the ideation stage. And I presume most of you know how M-Pesa works, but what predated M-Pesa, I mean, you have a population in Kenya that's a largely migrant population. And that's pretty consistent throughout Africa. And so it's not unusual for people to have to move several hundred miles from home in order to find work. And that could be in the agricultural and the mining, in a variety of different industries. And the requirement was just simply to get money home. I'm out working on a farm a couple hundred miles away from Nairobi. My family's back in Nairobi, and I need to get money to them. And so traditionally, the way that was done, the predating M-Pesa, was you handed a stack of money to the local bus driver. And he would take his tax, and the state police would take their tax, and somewhere along the other way, there's some other corruption would intervene, and substantially less money would arrive back. So you had the luxury, you had the opportunity to do that, or use, anybody here from MoneyGram or Western Union? No? Or use the thieves at MoneyGram or Western Union, which were imposing incredibly high fees on the poorest people in the world. I mean, it's almost appalling. And so Nick used, to his soul and just incredible amount of effort and credit, conceived this notion of what was M-Pesa, and we had the good fortune to work on it. And we were sort of in the ideation stage. We did the design requirements. We actually got through the development of it and the deployment of it. So it's really something we're quite proud of and something that keeps us very excited. But that's really why the mobile money, the peer-to-peer portion of what you think of as a mobile payment is substantially disproportionate to the other things indicated here, things like merchant payments, things like bill payments, and obviously NFC is something we've struggled with as a country, putting aside Apple Pay for a moment for some period of time. So adoption by region is a little bit redundant to the last slide. It's no surprise that Africa, far and away, from a volume standpoint, reasonably exceeds the rest of the world in terms of the mobile money infrastructure and the utilization of things like mobile money and mobile payments. Asia Pacific has become very prominent in this area as well, largely because a lot of the analogs that we talked about in Africa apply there as well. Migrant society, vast geography, not a lot of brick and mortar institutions where people can walk into. And certainly Alibaba, and more specifically Alipay, have had a substantial impact on the ability of mobile payments to become more pervasive in places like Southeast Asia. And then sadly we get to North America, sort of what can be argued as one of the most technically sophisticated countries in the world. Tons of infrastructure, more than we know what to do with. However, it's still really easy to swipe a card. It's still really easy to walk into a bank. It's the ability of having infrastructure and technology in many ways has been a little bit detrimental to our adoption of the mobile channel. And we're going to talk about why, what the obstacles are, what the challenges have been, and hopefully how we can overcome those obstacles because, again, it's safer, it's more convenient, the data becomes more interesting, it becomes a better user experience. However, we're still in our infancy and we're still getting over that learning curve. And Western Europe, not quite as technology behind as we are, but they figured it out. I mean, the MNOs are playing a pretty interesting role there. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit. I just got my 5-minute warning. Sample of successful plays. This is a random sample. I have half a dozen slides. I could have put any half a dozen, 12, 15 companies on this. I tried to take some that were more incumbents that were well understood. I took one that was maybe not somebody you understand as well. Alipay was part of Alibaba, and an upstart. So PayPal is well entrenched in the mobile payment space. Volume-wise, they far away exceed anybody else that publishes their numbers. It's been it's been the foundation of their business. I think PayPal is a very innovative and smart and extremely flexible company. I think they have some challenges in front of them because I think they've gotten a little bit stagnant here. But in today's context, they're still far and away the leader in the developed world. Alipay, or Alibaba, I should say, is purported to be the world's largest retailer in aggregate in terms of sales volume. I did not verify this. I didn't go through their annual report, but I did take this out of a snippet that I read recently. About 40% of their payments are made through the Alipay channel. So they have a very captive audience, and from what I understand, never having used it, the user experience is almost equivalent to Amazon One-Click, if you've ever used that. So it's a very, very good user experience. And then Dawala, again, another mobile payment. I think it appeals to that group of people, that younger set of people that Sasha referenced. I've never used Dawala. I've read about it. I know about it. I think it's really cool. I've actually never used it. But again, they're growing 15% month over month, so somebody's using it. They're getting to scale, and they're having a lot of success in the market. So those are just 3 random examples. Drivers of success. I think the first 2 are pretty obvious. It needs to be low cost to merchants and consumers. There needs to be acceptance. You walk to a POS terminal these days, and this is changing, and we have some examples of how it's changing. You walk to a POS terminal, a POS terminal today, you don't know whether to put a chip card in, swipe it, pay with your phone, or any of the other 10 or 12 or 15 ways that people can conceivably pay for something these days. What's going to change that is, first off, the user experience. I mean, my favorite user experience in the entire world is when I get out of an Uber. I get in, I tell them where I want to go, I leave. I walk into a Starbucks, very simplistic technology, closed loop, loyalty's there, 3D barcode. It creates a really good user experience and it makes it really sticky. And then because you now have an aggregate, things like GPS data, you have things like purchase data, you have things like financial data, the information that's available in order to create something very experiential and to combine an offer or combine a loyalty scheme around it becomes really powerful in the market. So I had hoped with the liability shift, which we've talked about for a number of different years, the one good thing that was going to come out of that was you're going to have this preponderance of hardware being replaced. And you see devices in the market, the Points, the Clovers, the Squares, that are capable of taking multiple payment methods. But again, I still think there's a lot of confusion in the market, and I think fundamentally that's been the challenge to the adoption of mobile payments here in the U.S. Key obstacles to adoption, I think there's poor understanding by consumers. If you ask 9, 10 people out of 10, I'm making that up sort of, but if you ask most people what a mobile wallet is, they actually probably don't know. They've probably used it at one point or another. But so I said to my wife, she uses the Starbucks app every day. She doesn't think of that as a mobile wallet. Lack of tangible benefits from merchants. It's expensive to retrain people to create customer queues. I mean, just the concept of having to put a chip card in a reader created a lot of pain for merchants. You can imagine with this overwhelming availability of technology and different payment methods what that might do to them. Sadly, acceptance of NFC, again, putting Apple Pay aside for a moment, has stalled here. I mean, I think we all had high hopes for soft card, and sadly that didn't go as maybe all of us had hoped. There's regulatory ownerships, and there's still this sort of unclear ownership of the data. You have an ecosystem that has a lot of people as part of it. So wrapping up really quickly, who are the likely winners? I ask that question often. I don't think there are any likely winners. I think it's going to be some combination of different applications that meet your need. P2P transfers, M-Pesa, Ping It, PayPal, I mean, that's a well understood peer-to-peer nature of an engagement that's been successful. The mobile bill payments, I think we all understand. You know, the wallets, I think the jury's still out. I mean, currency, the MCX product has now been delayed, and there's been a round of layoffs there. The numbers on Apple Pay have leveled off, and in some markets are starting to decline. Google Wallet and Samsung Pay, I think it's maybe still a little too early to tell. And I love the merchant apps. So I think there'll be a number of winners. I think it comes down to personal preference, the ability for the merchant to support that. And with that, and with my note saying get off, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Bring your name tag. All right, Thomas.
You're done. There you go. Advance right, go back. Okay, laser if you need it. Not sure why it's getting upset. There we go.
So good morning, everyone. And I have to admit, it's my first time at Leon's event, but I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, Leon. And Leon asked me to look a bit at the aspects of payments. Coming from the Payment Systems Development Group of the World Bank, it's something I'm very keen to do. And some refer to payments as the plumbing for the modern economy. I typically prefer the word bloodstream, or the blood circles, which really keeps the economy working. So we from the World Bank have been focusing on payments in the Payment Systems Development Group for almost 2 decades now. And we see still a lot of issues when we see national payment systems in specific countries. So key areas where we see the need for reforms are that there is a lack of access to financial services in still a lot of countries, and we already heard some of the figures, and I will explore about them a bit further in my presentation. We see infrastructure shortcomings, a lack of a coherent national strategy, and we also see inefficient payment instruments. So cash payment, of course, being one of them, but also other instruments like paper-based instruments like checks being here in the States, some instruments that are still in use and are obviously not that efficient like they could be. So for us, the importance of payment systems is obvious. It's to promote economic development on the one hand, to support financial stability during all the downtime of the economic crisis. What has worked were the payment systems. So something which really contributes to financial stability and to foster financial inclusion. And this is the main aspect I'd like to focus on in my today's presentation. Within the World Bank, we try to have a holistic look at the payment system. So payments are much more than simply the technology behind transferring funds from A to B. It's really a coherent framework which it needs to be looked at. So if we intervene in payment systems and if we try to support countries to that extent, we really try to look at the frameworks, legal and regulatory framework obviously being one of them, oversight of payment systems being a very important one, but also the cooperative framework. We also look, of course, at the payment systems themselves, so large value payment systems, security settlement systems, interbank money markets, and, of course, when it comes to financial inclusion, very important retail payment systems. And finally, some areas or some use cases which are very important to us are obviously those who are generating the high volume of payments, which are government payments and, for example, international remittances. This is the 2 billion figure Sasha put on his slides. And I think it's also worth looking a few years back, and we see that there has been a progress made. Since 2011, those who got financially included, the number of those increased, but still the critical figure is still 2 billion. And that's one of the reasons why the World Bank Group President set out the target to achieve universal financial access by 2020. Universal financial access meaning that everyone should have, every adult worldwide should have the possibility to get access to a transaction account, to transfer funds, and safely store some value. Of course, this is a target which is huge, talking about the 2 billion, and really needs to involve not only the private sector, but also public sector, donors. It also needs to involve, obviously, international organizations beyond the World Bank Group. However, we at the World Bank Group committed to contribute 1 billion new transaction accounts, and obviously we are not issuing these type of accounts on our own, but due to our work, due to the investments, for example, via the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, and our technical assistance work by the World Bank Group, we are hopeful to contribute this very demanding figure. These are the countries in another form of representation we are focusing at, but it's important to say that we are obviously not only focusing on these 25 countries. In order to achieve, obviously, this demanding figure of 2 billion new transaction accounts, it's worth to look at those countries where most of the unbanked are currently living. And these are the 25 countries that we came up with. But it's important to say that we, of course, as a World Bank Group, continue and are also focusing on all the other countries we are working in. When we refer to transaction accounts, it's of course an important step towards financial inclusion, but it's not the end objective, not the end goal. So transaction accounts are mainly used to transfer funds, to receive and initiate payments, but also to safely store some value. So in order to have the money below my pillow at home, to also be able to have to store it electronically, and ideally also to use it electronically, not needing to cash it out in order to make a payment, but make use of the electronic funds. Payments being the important building block towards financial access and financial inclusion has led us to the joint effort together with the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure to establish the payment aspects of financial inclusion task force about 2 years ago. And this task force has benefited from the contribution of a number of central banks among the CPMIs, so the standard setter in payments. Non-CPMI central banks, especially from developing countries like Vietnam, PCEAO, Brazil, and others. And we also have had international organizations on board, like the International Monetary Fund, IDB, SEMLA, and others. So we came together and really had the objective and formed the assumption that payments as such are an important financial service on its own, in its own right, but they also form part of a broader financial services package. They can not only facilitate access to other financial services, but in many cases are really a gateway and the possibility for the efficient provision of these financial services. And for us, a transaction account is very important, and of course the key pillar to provide electronic payment services. So if we want to get away from less efficient payment instruments, like for example cash, we then need to have a transaction account in place in order to initiate payments electronically. However, it was important to us that these transaction accounts not necessarily have to be provided by banks. Of course, banks have been very important and are still very important in providing transaction accounts, but a transaction account can also be, for example, an e-money account or mobile money to that extent as another form of e-money. So it can be also provided by an authorized or regulated non-bank institution, and we have seen a lot of developments in developed markets as well as in developing markets where we have seen payment institutions, e-money institutions, which are getting distinct licenses which are not fully financial institution licenses, but they are focusing on that important part of the payment of the financial services value chain, namely payments. So what we came up with is what we colloquially refer to the Buffy house. And as every house, for us, the objective is that it's stable, that it's something where we really can build on. And therefore, we have established some critical foundations we think are definitely needed in order to really achieve universal access and usage of these transaction accounts and electronic payment services. These critical enablers or foundations are, according to our report, the public and private sector commitment, the legal and regulatory framework, and also the ICT and payments infrastructure. And only if you have these bases, this foundation really in place and also stable, you can really leverage upon them and really identify those pillars or drivers for access, which then really allow us to make use and increase financial inclusion. So the critical enablers and drivers for universal financial access are for us the transaction account and payment product design, readily available access points, awareness and financial inclusion, and of course large volume use cases. So altogether, we came up with what we call guiding principles for each of these foundations, which are then further defined and also substantiated by key actions. And no worries, I've already seen that I only have 5 minutes left, so I will not present all the key actions, which are more than 40. So you're more than invited to read them in the report, because we really think that they are touching upon very important elements of the aspects of financial inclusion from a payments perspective. However, I just want to briefly touch base on some of the guiding principles and kind of mention some of the examples we are seeing. When it comes to private and public sector commitment, we really see the need, and we already see an approach that these institutions and organizations are coming together, be it globally, be it domestically. And we see in about 50 countries worldwide already financial inclusion strategies being established. However, it really needs also the private sector. So for our universal financial access agenda, we have received the commitment of so far 14 private sector institutions, some of them state-owned, but I'd say from the supply side, which are really committed to contribute to this numeric target. So it really takes also the private sector to that extent. When it comes to the foundation of the legal and regulatory framework, we see an improvement. We have seen an improvement over time, but we still see, especially in developing countries, that there are sometimes the necessary legal and regulatory foundations not in place. So for us, it's important that the legal and regulatory framework really underpins the financial inclusion by effectively addressing the relevant risks, and also by protecting consumers. Because if the trust is lost, then really it's going to be difficult to really board these consumers on and make them served and give them financial access. While at the same time, it's important for us to really foster innovation and competition. And one recent example is one picture from Myanmar, where, for example, the central bank has recently issued guidelines for mobile financial services. We have really seen the interest there of some of the private sector entities, Ooredoo, Telenor, to offer mobile money, but it was not possible because the legal and regulatory framework did not allow for it. So quite recently, for example, this has been changed by the Central Bank of Myanmar, and really it tries to promote innovation and competition and not hindering access of new types of payment service providers. Of course, we know that this is not everywhere the case, that we still see in a number of countries the attempt to really keep new innovators out of the financial sector. The final foundation is for us the ICT and payments infrastructure. This is something where we are not only looking at the payment systems, but also at supporting infrastructures like creditor databases, like ID, digital ID, one of the important topics there. So we really see the need that those infrastructures are leveraged in order to increase financial inclusion. On the payment system side, retail gross settlement systems are very important to that extent, and we have seen an increased development there. However, we still, on the retail payment side, when it comes to switches, when it comes to interoperability among switches, for example, that there is some more to be done. Mobile is, of course, one of the key topics, but frankly, going to a lot of these development countries, we still have a lot of white spots on the map, especially if we go out of the urban areas. And if not even basic voice, let alone data, is covered, then of course also the need or the usefulness of even a feature phone is limited. So to that extent, we need to fill the white gaps on the map when it comes to mobile coverage. So I assume I have 1 minute left for the remaining pillars. That's why I'll speed up a bit. So the transaction account and payment product design is, of course, one of the key features. We see that there is really a tendency, especially for those who are newly served, that they fully cash out. And there has been research that if they gain trust over time, they tend to reuse the payment, but it's an uphill struggle. So it's really important that the service providers are using the opportunity to design the respective payments products respectively. We also need readily available access points. And here, a combination of agents, bank branches, or payment service provider branches, of ATMs, of POS terminals, and of course mobile technology is the right way to go. And we still, of course, see the number in absolute terms when it comes to ATM and POS terminal growth, but not very often those are really situated where they need to be. So a lack of interoperability sometimes leads to 5, 6, 7 POS terminals at one counter, like this example here in Istanbul, or 3 ATMs next to each other in a highly frequented shopping mall, like the other example here in South Africa. So there is something where we still can work on and should work on, and like, for example, agent banking, one of the key success factors in Brazil. And of course, when it comes to mobile money, like this example from Swaziland, where really there is the mobile money providers are close to the customer. Awareness and financial literacy, before I end now, which I see on the sign in front of me, is very important because it makes the people comfortable in using the services. And Project Greenback is one of the examples the World Bank Group promotes. It's going to the migrant communities and really introduce and educate them in using those financial services in a very cost-efficient way. And last but not least, this is the main pillar when it comes to large volume use cases. Here we have international remittances as one of the important areas, transit payments, we have government payments, and here we still see that especially in lower and middle income countries, a lot of these government payments, for example, if it comes to social benefits, are still dispersed in cash. So there's a huge opportunity when it comes to onboarding people and giving them access to transaction accounts and really providing them the possibility to use these transaction accounts even beyond the social transfers. One of the examples you can see here in Ethiopia with the Productive Safety Net program, where we have pilots when it comes to the establishment or the use of e-payment mechanisms to that extent. This brings me to the end. So I think there is a lot to do in order to make and build this house when it comes to universal financial access and use of the transaction accounts. I think it requires all of us, and it really should be a stable house which promotes economic growth. Thank you very much.
I'm not having any slides,
Okay.
so
No problem.
but I need a place for the paper to rest without it falling down.
How's that?
That'll work.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. No slides here, so I'll just talk for 50 minutes. Let's see how that goes. My name is Fredrik Voss. I lead NASDAQ's blockchain innovation initiative. That means I work with our corporate objectives in that space, proposing strategies for how to achieve those objectives. I'm involved in our selections of project and use cases that we, identification and selection of those that we deploy in this space. I also help out with various investment process in the space, looking at investment opportunities and so on. So that means that I'm really not so interested in what it is or how it works. I'm more interested in what it does and how it can improve the performance of capital markets, which is sort of dear to us. I'm assuming there is a varying degree of understanding what a blockchain is, or a distributed ledger is, or how it works. I'm not going to delve into that because that eats up a lot of time, and I'm not very good at it. We should have had one of our engineers for that. But to try to level set a little bit, I want you to do a little bit of an experiment here, and start by imagining a digitized asset. So start with an asset. An asset can be a security, could be money, could be an identity, could be a small song, could be basically anything that you possess. So think about that. Now think about that in a digitized format. So if you thought about something on paper, forget about that. Think about that as a digitized asset. Now think about you being able to transfer that asset to anyone in the world at any point in time of the day with a safety and certainty that that transaction is immutable, final, and correct. That is what we think that distributed ledger technology can potentially do. And if you think about how some of these things are done today, you realize that that is quite a significant difference. If you, for example, simple thing as transferring money from your European account to the US account, which happens that I do, takes forever, costs a lot of money. Even worse if you want to do that with securities, just imagine doing that for health records. So that gives you a feel of sort of why we are intrigued by this technology in capital markets. Also putting this a little bit into context, why does NASDAQ look at it? Well, NASDAQ is actually a financial technology company. We've been that since the early 90s. We are the world's largest supplier of capital market infrastructure to other exchanges, other clearinghouses, other depositories, to market surveillance organizations. That's the bulk of NASDAQ business. On the side, we run a small exchange here in the US called NASDAQ that most people have heard of, and that it's a relatively small part of our business. And being in the financial technology space, we keep track of what's going on in financial technology. So the Blockchain Innovation Initiative is just one stream of sort of innovation activities in this space that we're engaged in. So we work with big data, cloud computing, cryptography, machine intelligence, virtual reality, all that stuff that attracts billions of dollars from VCs to startups. We've been doing that for over 20 years. So it's natural for us to be part of this. It was natural for us to be early out looking at this technology. It just so happens that this has caused a lot of attention recently. That's why I'm standing here, I guess, talking about it and not talking about something else. So that's where it is. And we started to look at this space 3 years ago. We come into it from Bitcoin. Bitcoin, what's that? The new asset. Should we set up a marketplace for Bitcoins? Spent about 3 seconds on that and decided it's not really about the Bitcoin. It's about the underlying technology. It's about the distributed ledger. That's what's attractive to us and its potential in capital markets. So that is what's intriguing to us. And so we think that this ability of, in a better way than today, or in a different way than today, not always better, but in a different way than today, keeping track of who owns what, keeping track of the possession of digitized assets, we think that can bring efficiencies to capital markets. We think it can bring operational efficiencies. Today down on Wall Street and in Jersey and in London and in Stockholm, where I'm from, there are gazillions of people just reconciling databases. We think that is a waste of resource. A lot of that can be used in a better ways, and we think that this technology can help resolve some of that. We also think it can help speeding up certain processes. So we already touched upon slow settlement mechanisms. For example, a slow payment, a slow transfer of ownership, a slow settlement of a security. Some securities that trade in financial markets takes a month to settle. And of course, if you have an extended period of time from execution of a trade in an asset to the settlement of that time, you have counterparty risk, you have systemic risk, and if there are technologies that can speed that up, we're going to have to spend less capital on protecting ourselves against that risk. We will need to have less collateral in place because we have a more efficient operation. So we see operational efficiencies, we see capital efficiencies, but the really exciting part is the new business models. We just imagine you being able to transfer any kind of asset around the globe in real time with certainty that it's accurate and settlement is final and so on. What new businesses can that enable? That is the really interesting part in our mind, but that's also very, very difficult. We think that actually the exploitation of the technology will start in the efficiency and then it'll move out into the innovative things. Though we have a couple of examples that I'm willing to share with you that we think are reasonably innovative. 15 years from now, we're going to look at that and say, well, not very innovative. So there are 3 reasons why we're interested in the technology. It's in our role as a service provider in the post-trade space. I should actually say there are 3 areas of particular interest to us. There are many, many applications of this technology, I'm sure about that. But for NASDAQ, we spend our time mainly focusing on the post-trade space, not so much in price discovery and exchange, but in the post-trade, the clearing, the settlement, the issuance, depository custodian stuff of capital markets. We also spend a fair amount of time in the regulatory transparency, because we think this technology can help regulators get a better insight into what is going on, better control of consolidation risks, better control of concentration risks, systemic risks, all of those issues we discovered around 2008. And the third area we explore is the relationship between an issuer of an asset and the holder of that asset. Of course, if we can do these peer-to-peer, strengthen the peer-to-peer relationship between an issuer and a holder of an asset, we can see some of that dynamic changing on how things are done and how investors communicate with their companies that they own, and vice versa in particular. So those are the 3 areas that we focus on. And there are 3 reasons why we do this. One is in our role as service provider to the post-trade space. we don't do that over here, but in Europe, particularly around the Baltic Sea, we run CCPs. We are the CSD. We do the settlement. We do the payment. We collect the securities, and we send the payment the other way. So in that capacity, we think that by leveraging this technology, we could potentially increase the value of the service that we provide to our members and to the clients, ultimately the investors. So that's one area. I already mentioned that we are, we are really a technology company, and our bulk of our business is selling and implementing, supporting that technology to other exchanges, clearing houses, market surveillance organizations, etc. And we of course want to make sure that those products and solutions we sell are as attractive as possible to our clients. So there's the second reason why we're investing in this space. Third reason is really more of a second order effect. So in the US, where we run that little exchange down at Times Square, we're not really engaged in what happens after a trade is done. So when you've done the trade in Apple, we sort of shoves it along down the chain, and someone makes sure it settles properly. But of course, as an exchange, we are interested in having as an efficient post-trade plumbing as possible, because if resources are released in that process, we think some of that will be to sort of go back to the sort of front end side of things and generate more active economy, more active trading, more IPOs, and all of that kind of good stuff that the exchange lives from. So those are the three buckets. So we have the three buckets of interest. We have our regulatory transparency, post-trade processing, the relationship between issuers and investors. And we started looking at this 3 years ago, as I said. We spent about 1.5 years on researching, analyzing. You have engineers with propellers on their head and tinfoil hats on, looking at it. They explored it, they experimented, they put up, ran it through labs, checked it, and we got to a point about a year ago, almost a year to the day, because 23rd of May last year, we announced the first use case, the first product that we were going to launch, leveraging the technology, and that project was subsequently launched, the product was launched really at the end of last year. So in December we put it to use, and that is an application we call Link. It is used here in the US, and it allows private companies to, I should actually briefly describe what it is. It is this, and the architecture of it. So in the bottom of our solution, there is a distributed ledger. It is a permissioned ledger. It is not the open Bitcoin ledger. It's a permissioned ledger, but it is a distributed ledger a la blockchain. And we don't do that. We use other people's blockchains. We don't develop blockchains. What we do is we develop applications, because blockchains are only ledgers. You should all go home and do something better with your life than sitting here listening to people talking about ledgers, because you all know what that is. But on top of that, we build applications, and we build applications that satisfy the needs in specific markets. And the first application we have built is called Link. And it allows a startup company, for example, any private company, it doesn't have to be a startup, a private company to issue shares on the ledger. It's the only legal representation of that asset. It's not a copy of a certificate in a vault somewhere. It is not a copy of a book entry that a depository has done in some kind of traditional database. It's the only legal representation of that asset. It allows then the company to transfer those shares to the investors. They have a different kind of application that we have built, that also part of the Link solution, where the investor can see that, oh, I paid $1 million, I got 500 shares back. It allows the investors to transfer the shares between themselves if there is a trade in the secondary market. And this product, this solution, does this without the existing of a central depository. There is no equivalent to a DTC in that solution. The technology itself governs this. There is no CCP involved, because settlement is immediate. As soon as the transaction has happened, it is executed, it is settled. So we have built a real-world product, a demonstrator of that initial scenario that we talked about, that you're able to issue and transfer a digitized asset anywhere you want at any given time. So that is the first exploitation or first demonstrator or first early adoption product that we have built to show what you can do with the technology. The other thing, we've done some other things, but I'll pass that. I think one of the more innovative things it's not a product, it's a demo and a prototype that we showed at the conference earlier this week, where we have a partner company that build solar panels, or you can take any solar panels basically. So you have a solar panel, you connect that to a unit, an Internet of thing, basically, a thing that is connected to the internet. So you have that thing measuring the production of solar energy. That thing is connected to our distributed ledger solution. And when the sun shines, it in real time issues renewable energy certificates into the Link application, and then they can be traded and transferred without the central third party, without the CCP. So now you start to think about, ooh, you can do some really interesting stuff with these things. So those are a couple of examples on what you can do with the technology in our mind. I got 2 minutes. I'll wrap up quickly. So we see the potential. All of this remains to be proven. Of course, we're just scratching the surface. The only really big use case right now is for cryptocurrency, and that is not really that big. I mean, Bitcoin market cap $7 billion. It's basically nothing in the grand scheme of things. So we have a pretty long way to go before we see a wide-scale adoption of the technology. What are the main obstacles as we see it? Interesting shift in dialogue in the last 6 months, 6 to 12 months ago. All of these discussions, panels, conferences we went to, it was all about the technology. 1 minute, I'll be in 1 minute, 15 seconds. It was all about the technology, consensus mechanism, mining, how does it all work? Very little discussion about that now. There is still a lot of building needs to be done, still a lot of engineering needs to be done, but there seems to be a growing consensus, pun intended, that the technology will work. The technology will be sound. It will support this. So what are the obstacles then? Well, we have a legal and regulatory side, and all the focus has been on, dear regulator, don't regulate too much. But actually, what we need is legislators helping out, creating legal certainties, because these business models that we now can anticipate are not anticipated by existing laws and regulations. So to create legal certainty for these kinds of transactions that we just thought about, we need a little bit of help. So we engage a lot with the dialogue with regulators and legislators around that. There is also a growing realization that, whoa, we're not starting from a white piece of paper. We assumed that 2 years ago. There is existing Amazon jungle of existing infrastructure, and that is not going to go away in one day. So this technology, we need to be able to create interfaces and transition solutions for how to deploy this technology without totally disrupting what's going on right now. And finally, to wrap things up, yeah, so what? We can do all of these exciting things, but dear market participants, how do you actually want it to work? Yes, we can do real-time settlement, but is that really what we want to do on a large scale in capital markets? So I'll end there. I think on minus a minute or two. So apologies for that, but appreciate the chance to address you, and looking forward to some exciting questions now. We're in the coffee break.
Okay, so we have the Q&A for all the speakers. I don't know if these mics are on. Can you hear? Yeah. And maybe to start it off, Howard, on your list of, and by the way, it's been such different topics. Just to all remember, he was talking about the state of global mobility. On your list of likely winners, I did not see Amazon. And just since you mentioned Alipay, which has really grown out of Alibaba, I was wondering, do you see any of the retailers potentially taking over a major role in financial services in the US? And why has that not happened yet?
So, is this on? You guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So to answer your question specifically about retailers' role in the payment landscape, the ones that are up there, so the Chipotles, the Starbucks, they create a very experiential type engagement. And it's a very closed loop. Most of them are closed loop. They're fairly light on the technology in the form of 3D barcodes, and if I'm not mistaken, I think they're all prepaid, right? So there's not a lot of financial risk, and so I think that's about as far as they'll delve into trying to solve that problem. In terms of the retailers more broadly trying to address this problem, I think that has tried to be addressed through MCX. And so for those of you not familiar with MCX, you saw a logo called Currency, and that was a consortium of a lot of the large retailers led by Walmart to come up with a wallet that would be applicable at most places you would shop. There was a statistic I heard recently, actually not that recently, about a year ago, at a conference, and I can't quote the source because there was somebody sitting on a panel that said about 70% of consumer purchases are made in 6 stores. Now that might not apply in a place like New York where you have stores on every corner and you have your variety of 9 coffee shops within a 2-block radius. But typically as you get out into more rural areas, into middle America, you do your grocery shopping at Kroger's, you might buy your home goods at Target, you might buy your durable goods at a place like Home Depot. You never sort of deviate from those central points of interest, those central points where you make the majority of your personal purchases. And so I think MCX was trying to address that and came out with a mobile platform and a very sort of compelling story. But sadly, and I think this is indicative of sort of the recent press about their round of layoffs and their delaying product, they've had an inability to execute. So the retail space, while they've presented a lot of interesting observations and a lot of interesting opportunities, other than the ones that are doing very sort of specific, low-level technology, I shouldn't say low-level technology, but Horcher's words, simplistic types of technology, have had outstanding success. As a group, I don't think you've seen anybody sort of knock that pin over. And Amazon's an interesting one because Amazon sort of has all the right pieces. And I think it's inevitable that they will make a big push into the payment space, but everything I've seen has been they've been pretty tight-lipped about it.
Okay. Thank you. Now, do we have questions from the audience? Please step up to the mic.
Yes, my name is Patrick McGrory. My question was for Fredrik. You didn't mention, you mentioned many reasons why NASDAQ is interested in this technology, and I must say I represent a company that's an $8.5 billion company listed on NASDAQ. So with all due respect, is it a search for relevance in a future that doesn't require a NASDAQ?
Can you hear me? I think when answering that question, you need to be actually quite particular which part of NASDAQ you're talking about and which part of the transaction chain you are talking about. You know, regardless, we have spent 3 years looking at this, and we tried it against many of our business models. One of the business models where we don't think it really applies is in the price discovery part of the process. Current centralized database systems where you can support high volume, low latency. We're chasing nanoseconds in terms of order book management and matching of trades. We struggle to see the relevance of the technology in the foreseeable future for that part of the business. For what goes on afterwards, so some of our business in the Nordics, for example, around the Baltic Sea, where we are a CCP, where we are a depository, the technology certainly asks some serious questions of any business models that is based on you being, you know, I update the central database, that is what I do. You know, then that it asks some serious questions of that. Or if you have a very slow, you're part of a slow processing of transaction, post-trade, something like that, then it also asks some questions about that. Having said that, you know, there are certainly elements of those units, of those companies, or ourselves in some cases, activities that are definitely challenged. There are some things that I think as we explore more in the technology, we realize, well, actually, this technology doesn't really eliminate the need for governance. And a lot of what these trusted third parties do is governance. They do a lot of operational stuff that may go away, but there's an element of governance. Who can participate? What happens if you don't behave? What are the criteria for joining? You know, how, you know, and planning for upgrades of the technology. Even ledgers need to be upgraded over time. So it may be that the entities disappear or change dramatically, but some way a community that leveraging a technology like this, a network of participants, have to organize that. And you can have a Swiss way of doing it, where we have a referendum every time there's going to be a change, or they may come to the conclusion that let's delegate that to people who know what they're talking about. Well, that looks pretty similar to a trusted third party on the governance side. So yes, and you know, you have to be a little bit specific when answering a question about, you know, is NASDAQ going to exist in the future?
lady up here. Step to the mic.
Hi, thank you very much. My question is, the blockchain technology is very, very advanced in security. It seems that it can protect a lot of assets without extra efforts going forward. My question is, could that eliminate a lot of frauds, let's say money laundering or hacking fundamentally, or what do you see the threat for this technology in terms of security, technology-wise?
It has many interesting features like security. I mean, it says that on the tin. We haven't yet actually tested that on any large scale. We're starting to see sort of non-cryptocurrency use cases being tested now, being put out there. Our Link initiative. We have a proxy voting thing in Estonia. Others are putting things out there. And I think we'll learn more about if they actually work from a security aspect around that. I mean, obviously, if someone detects a major, you talked about threats to the technology's, deployment. If someone in those processes, smashes a big fat hole in the security part of it, of course, then we have a problem. But that remains to be seen. That remains to be proven, I think.
I'd like to take a question maybe for the World Bank, because I know we're going to have a whole blockchain discussion also this afternoon.
Yeah.
Question on the World Bank or on the financial services? Maybe I'll start with a question then to Thomas. You were talking about the guiding principles, and I'm wondering with all these supranational organizations, whether it's the IMF or the World Bank, how do you actually make that into policy in countries? And when you gave the example of Myanmar, I was wondering, did they come to you and say, do you have the ready-made inclusion principles in a box so we can just apply them? Or how does that get rolled out?
So I think it's nothing which is really ready-made and where you can really use one kind of example for all the world. So the idea is, and what we do, not only for the payment aspects of financial inclusion, but generally, if we work together with the country on the national payment system reform, is really to do an assessment. What is the current state? What are the shortcomings? Where are areas and international best practices, obviously, like the ones we establish in the PAFI framework, which are not yet followed. So being, for example, on the legal and regulatory side, to address or to have a rather functional than institutional approach. Functional meaning that it matters what you're doing, and you should be regulated and overseen depending on what you're doing, rather than you being a bank or a non-bank. So these are elements we are then, of course, trying to do and work together with the respective countries. But in the end, of course, it's a country decision. However, in going forward, and especially with the Universal Financial Access Agenda, of course, a whole new venue of work comes along, where it's really but specifically looking how can payments within a country increase financial inclusion. And we mentioned a number of guiding principles. There are specific key actions and also practical examples within this report, and I'd really like to invite you to look at this report, where it gives a kind of impression, like, for example, a tiered account structure, so lower requirements when it comes to KYC for certain type of transactions and things like, really to allow people to board on, to really come into the financial sector. And this is something we feel very passionate about.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take maybe one more question, and then during the coffee break, you'll also be able to interact with the panelists. Yes?
So my question, Mr. Fredrik, about what you've learned in the blockchain. I think your point about apps versus technology is a really important one, because everyone assumes that blockchain has all the functional components that applications that have been built up over the last 20 years have. So, when you look at blockchain, it seems to be moving linear workflow to a stacked workflow and almost taking out certain workflow stages. What was your experience with it, with the new product?
Actually, I think you're spot on there. I mean, a couple of experiences from, first of all, it's a big difference moving from proof of concept out to the real world. So the learning is really when you get out in the real world. So we've done it for 3 years, but in one hand, you can say we've only done it for 6 months because that's when we first had to address real world. And one learning is there's a lot of application needed. I mean, the ledger is a ledger, and it does that, and it'll be populated with more and more features, but there's a lot of applications needed. And in order to be able to build applications, you really need to understand the needs that you address. There's been sort of a panacea that blockchain fixes everything. No, fundamental needs remain, fundamental requirements of people sort of using the technology remains. They need to know what they are doing, and there's a lot of application needed. Governance doesn't go away. If you think about large-scale capital markets adoptions, there are still laws and regulations that need to be met, and there are criteria who can join, and sort of a framework around that. I think we also see that even when you have a ungoverned world, so unpermissioned blockchain solution like Bitcoin, for example, I mean, there is a crisis of governance. And I think that has shown that governance is needed. If you have people using the same infrastructure, there needs to be governance. So governance doesn't go away. I think those are the two main ones, actually, that we have learned so far. And there needs to be a need. I mean, there needs be a desire to have the solutions. And I think in 10 years' time, 5-10 years' time, we're not going to talk about blockchain. No one is going to talk about blockchain. How much do you talk about Oracle databases today? We're not going to talk about blockchain for either of two reasons. One, it failed to take off. It failed to do it. Or it took off spectacularly, and then it's going to become a commodity. I mean, no one is going to care about what the underlying technology is. You're just going to have your needs satisfied in a cheaper, more efficient way, and maybe some previously unthought of needs satisfied by the enablement or the leveraging this technology. But we're not going to care about it. We're not going to have these discussions in 10 years' time.
Great. So I think that about wraps it up. Thanks to all the speakers, and we'll have a 15-minute. Do we still get a 15-minute break? 10. You get a 10-minute break now.